She was furious after being splashed by a Ferrari. What she did next shocked everyone, but no one could have imagined how deeply it was connected to her past. A dormant revenge, an unexpected love. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised. If you enjoy love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel and leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing, the rain seemed endless that October afternoon in Chicago. The sky was dense, heavy, as if the entire world was about to collapse upon the city that never stopped. Amber Collins stood at the edge of Michigan Avenue, waiting for a bus that would never arrive on time. People rushed past, umbrellas knocking against each other, faces closed against the storm that seemed determined to wash away all the grime of the metropolis. Water was already soaking her ankles when the red Ferrari sped across the avenue, raising a wave of dirty water and mud that hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her clothes, her skin, even her silence were covered by that cold, filthy impact. At first, it seemed just another gesture of urban disregard, another daily humiliation that the city imposed on those without their own cars, those who depended on public transportation, the forgotten ones. But for Amber, it carried the weight of a cosmic warning. She felt the universe touching the scar that had never healed. The death of her young son, Michael, years before, in a public clinic hastily shut down due to irregularities. A clinic that, she would soon discover, had a direct connection to the man behind the wheel of that car. The same man who now drove on without even looking in his rearview mirror, without noticing the destruction he left behind. Amber stood there dripping mud and rage, feeling the rain mix with tears she hadn't shed in a long time. Michael would be 10 years old now. He would be running under this same rain, laughing, soaking the old shoes she bought downtown. But Michael was buried in Oakwood Cemetery, in a simple grave she visited every Sunday, bringing cheap flowers and promises of justice she could never fulfill. 3 days later, still with the mud-stained clothes stored in her closet as evidence, Amber saw the name for the first time in a newspaper report she found abandoned on the subway. Daniel Lawrence, son of a real estate magnate, heir to an empire that swallowed entire neighborhoods under the pretext of urban revitalization. The article talked about the new social projects of the Lawrence Foundation, a philanthropic institution supposedly helping underprivileged communities. The photo showed a tall man with striking features, expensive suits, and a calculated smile, posing next to children in a slum that would be transformed into housing developments. Amber recognized those eyes. Even through the stained newsprint, even with the smile forged for the cameras, she recognized the cold gaze that had passed by her on that rainy afternoon. And it was there, on the cold sofa of the two-room apartment where she survived, that she made a decision that would change her life forever. She would not run away, nor stay silent, nor accept another injustice. She would infiltrate that world of privilege and lies. She would destroy it from within. For 2 weeks, Amber worked on her new identity like an artisan molding clay. She redid her resume, omitting the difficult years after Michael's death, the cleaning jobs, the sleepless nights studying alone. She highlighted her social work education, the online courses she took, her experience in small NGOs. She created a version of herself that could pass through the filters of an elite foundation. When she applied for the position of Social Projects Coordinator, she knew it was a risky bet. Women like her didn't get jobs in places like that. But perhaps that's exactly why she had a chance. Perhaps they needed someone who seemed authentic, who could bring credibility to their facade actions. The interview was scheduled for a rainy Tuesday. Amber arrived at the Lawrence Foundation building in downtown Chicago, wearing the only suit she owned, bought on sale, and adjusted by herself. The building was impeccable, all glass and marble, with discreet security guards and a lobby that looked more like a museum than an office. When she entered the meeting room, Daniel was standing with his back to her, looking out the window that faced Grant Park. He turned slowly, and for a moment, just a moment, their eyes met in a way that made the air between them grow denser. Amber felt a shiver run up her spine, a mix of anger and something she couldn't name. Throughout the interview, Daniel barely raised his eyes from the papers, asking technical questions in a controlled, distant voice. But something in his posture changed when she began talking about her experience with underprivileged communities. He didn't recognize her completely, but there was something familiar in that voice, in that direct way of facing problems. A disturbing presence that stirred memories he preferred to keep buried. Amber was hired. The following Monday, she started working on the 15th floor of the building, in a small but well-equipped office with a view of the city stretching in all directions. In the first few days, she moved between files and meetings, listening to conversations, interpreting silences, mapping the unwritten hierarchies of that environment. She discovered that the Lawrence Foundation operated like a well-oiled machine of appearances. There were weekly meetings where they discussed projects that sounded beautiful on paper, but in practice only served to justify evictions and increase the value of land that the family's construction company later bought at ridiculous prices. She found suspicious documents, contracts with obscure clauses, donations that were laundered through ghost NGOs. And amid all this, she observed Daniel. He moved through the corridors like an elegant predator, always in command, always in control. He wore suits that cost more than she earned in a year, drove cars that were works of art on wheels, spoke on the phone in 3 different languages. But there was something broken in him that only she seemed to see. Amber began to seduce him subtly, almost imperceptibly. A different perfume each day, a blouse that revealed a little more skin, intelligent comments in meetings that challenged him without directly confronting him. She saw how he reacted, how his pupils dilated when she came close, how his voice became slightly deeper when he answered her questions. Daniel was cold, vain, obsessed with control. But she saw, behind the impeccable facade, the cracks. The nervous tic he had of rubbing his thumb against his index finger when he was tense, the way he avoided his own reflection in the mirrored elevators, the shadow that formed in his dark eyes whenever someone mentioned his father or asked about his family. During a meeting about a new housing project, Amber discovered that the chosen site was exactly where the old clinic where Michael died had been. The same location that would be transformed into a luxury apartment complex, sold to young executives who worked in the central region. Her hand trembled when she signed the approval documents, but she managed to maintain a neutral expression. That night, alone in her apartment, Amber didn't expect to feel what she felt. For a moment, looking at Michael's photo on the small living room table, a wave of empathy hit her. Daniel was responsible, yes, but perhaps he was just another piece in a larger game that he himself didn't completely control. Perhaps he too was a prisoner of that system of power and money that swallowed lives and dreams without blinking. This empathy terrified her. She couldn't allow herself to feel anything but anger. She couldn't hesitate now that she was so close to discovering the truth about what happened to her son. The following week, during a presentation on corporate social responsibility, Daniel asked to speak with her privately. Amber followed him to his office, a spacious and sophisticated environment with artwork on the walls and a privileged view of the city. He closed the door and approached her in a way that made her heart race. "You're different from the other people who work here," he said, stopping a few inches away. "There's something about you that bothers me, and at the same time, attracts me." Amber forced a smile she hoped looked natural. "Maybe it's because I really care about the work we do here." "Is that all?" Daniel extended his hand and lightly touched her arm. "Or is there something more you're not telling me?" For a moment, she thought he had discovered who she really was. But then she realized this was just his way of approaching her, of testing the limits, of seeing how far she would allow him to go. And she decided to play his game. "We all have our secrets, Daniel," she murmured, letting her voice become lower, more intimate. "The question is whether we're willing to share them with the right people." He smiled in a way she didn't know whether was dangerous or seductive. Perhaps it was both. "Dinner tomorrow?" he asked. "I know a place you'll like." Amber accepted, knowing she was entering an even more dangerous phase of her plan, but also knowing it was exactly what she needed to do. To get to the truth about Michael, she needed to reach Daniel Lawrence's heart, and if that meant seducing him, manipulating him, making him fall in love with her, then that's exactly what she would do. That night, she prepared herself like a warrior, preparing for battle. She chose a black dress that accentuated her curves, makeup that highlighted her brown eyes, a perfume she knew would intoxicate him. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw no longer the broken woman who cried for her son's death, but a hunter ready to attack. The restaurant was in Lincoln Park, a sophisticated but not ostentatious place, frequented by artists and intellectuals from the city. Daniel arrived punctually, dressed more casually but still impeccable. During dinner, they talked about art, politics, philosophy. He was intelligent, cultured, had interesting opinions about almost everything, and gradually, without expecting it, Amber found herself genuinely interested in what he had to say. When he spoke about his childhood, a shadow passed over his eyes. He briefly mentioned a mother who had disappeared when he was a teenager, an authoritarian father who controlled every aspect of his life, the constant pressure of carrying the weight of a surname that opened doors but also created invisible prisons. "Sometimes I feel like my entire life was planned by other people," he confessed, swirling the wine in his glass. "As if I were just an actor playing a role that was written even before I was born." Amber felt something moving inside her chest, something dangerous that threatened her determination. "And if you could rewrite that role," she asked, "what would you change?" Daniel looked at her intensely, as if he could see through her soul. "Maybe I'd try to be someone worthy of a woman like you." The answer caught her off guard. For a moment, she forgot all her anger, all her plan for revenge. For a moment, she was just a woman having dinner with a man who desired her and whom, perhaps, she also desired. 3 weeks after that dinner, Amber's life had transformed into a dangerous dance of seduction and investigation. Each morning, she woke up in the small, dark apartment in Wicker Park, carefully got ready, and immersed herself in the world of luxury and power of the Lawrence Foundation. Each night, she returned home carrying fragments of information, loose clues, and a growing confusion of feelings she didn't know how to control. Daniel had become a constant presence in her life. He found excuses to call her to his office, to prolong meetings until they were the only two in the office illuminated by the city's neon lights. He sent flowers to her desk without a card, left books he knew she would like to read, invented work commitments that forced them to have dinner together at least 3 times a week. And Amber allowed all this, nurtured this approach because she needed him close to discover the truth. But with each meeting, each intimate conversation, each intense look he gave her, she felt more lost in her own game. On Thursday of the 3rd week, during a meeting about the housing project that would be built on the site of the old clinic, Daniel casually mentioned that he had worked on that land years before, when he was still an architecture student and helped his father in the family business. "It was one of my first projects," he said, pointing to the map spread out on the table. "I was young, inexperienced. I believed I was doing something good for the community." Amber felt her blood freeze in her veins. What kind of project was it? Demolition of an old structure, a clinic that had been closed due to sanitary problems. Daniel sighed, running his hand through his dark hair. "At the time, I thought we were cleaning up the area, giving a chance for something better to emerge there. Only later did I understand that there were people who depended on that place, even with all its problems." The room seemed to spin around Amber. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to maintain a neutral expression while her world collapsed internally. Daniel had admitted his participation in the destruction of the clinic where Michael died. Not only that, he had been the architect of the demolition. "Do you remember specific cases?" she asked, her voice coming out hoarser than intended. "People who were harmed?" Daniel looked at her attentively, noticing something different in her expression. "Why are you asking this?" "Professional curiosity," she lied. "It's important to understand the social impact of our projects." He was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes fixed on her as if trying to decipher a puzzle. "There was one case that marked me," he finally said. "A young woman lost her son because the clinic was closed abruptly. The child needed specific treatment, and when they were transferred to another hospital, it was already too late." Amber felt the world stop. He knew. Somehow Daniel knew about Michael, about her, about everything. But he continued speaking as if it were just a distant memory. "I found out about the case through a social worker who protested against the demolition. He said there were many families who depended on that clinic, as precarious as it was. I was disturbed for weeks. It was the first time I questioned whether what we were doing was really right." "And what did you do?" Amber whispered. "Nothing," he admitted, his voice laden with what seemed like remorse. "I was 22, trying to prove my worth to my father, wanting to show that I could be as ruthless as he was in business. So I swallowed the guilt and moved on. But I never forgot. That night, Amber couldn't sleep. She paced around her small apartment like a caged animal, sometimes feeling pure rage at having confirmation that Daniel was guilty, sometimes confused by the vulnerability she had seen in his eyes when he spoke about Michael's case. She decided she needed to accelerate her plan. She could no longer bear this duality of feelings, this toxic mixture of desire and hatred that was consuming her strength. She spent the entire night planning how she would gain access to the Foundation's confidential files, to the old contracts, to the evidence she needed to publicly expose the Lawrence family's crimes. On Friday, she arrived at the office with renewed determination. Daniel called her for a private meeting, but this time she had her own agenda. She wore a navy blue dress that she knew he loved, a more intense perfume, makeup that highlighted her lips. If she was going to manipulate him, she would do it in the most efficient way possible. "You're different today," Daniel observed, as soon as she entered his office. "More intense." "Maybe it's because I finally understood some things," she said, approaching him in a deliberately seductive manner. "About you. About me, about what's happening between us." Daniel rose from his chair, his eyes fixed on her with a hunger that made something contract in Amber's lower abdomen. "And what did you understand?" "That we're both playing a game," she murmured, stopping very close to him, close enough to feel the heat of his body. "The question is, do you have the courage to play it to the end?" He didn't respond with words. Instead, he held her face between his hands and kissed her with an intensity that caught her off guard. The kiss was hungry, desperate, full of a need that seemed to come from years of repression. Amber felt herself melting against him, momentarily forgetting everything. Michael, her revenge, all the reasons why this was wrong. When they separated, both were breathless. Daniel looked at her as if she were the only real thing in his world of appearances. "I need you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what you've done to me, but I can't think of anything else." Amber forced a smile she hoped looked passionate, when in fact she felt divided between genuine desire and guilt for using that feeling as a weapon. "Then show me," she whispered. "Give me complete access to your life. I want to know everything about you." Daniel hesitated for a moment, as if some instinct warned him of the danger. But then he nodded, pulling her into another kiss that sealed the agreement between them. In the following days, Amber had access to parts of Daniel's life that no one else knew. He took her to dinner at exclusive restaurants, to vernissages in art galleries, to social events where she met Chicago's elite, people who moved millions of dollars as if they were pocket change, who decided the fate of entire neighborhoods in cocktail conversations. But it was when he took her to his apartment, a luxurious penthouse in the Gold Coast, that Amber had access to what really mattered. Daniel, completely trusting her, left her alone in his private office while he answered a call in the bedroom. And it was there that she found what she was looking for. In a locked drawer, whose key he kept with his other personal keys, there was a folder with old Lawrence Foundation documents, eviction contracts, demolition reports, correspondence with public authorities. And there, among the papers yellowed by time, was the document that confirmed all her worst fears. A contract signed by Daniel Lawrence, then 22 years old, authorizing not only the demolition of the clinic where Michael died, but also specifying that the operation should be done with maximum speed, regardless of patient transfer protocols. The paper made it clear that they knew there were people being treated at the clinic, but they prioritized the speed of the operation over patient safety. Amber photographed the document with trembling hands, feeling a mixture of triumph and pain that left her nauseous. She finally had the proof she needed. Daniel was not just an accomplice. He was one of the main people responsible for her son's death. When he returned to the office, he found her standing by the window, looking at the illuminated city. "Everything okay?" he asked, approaching from behind and wrapping his arms around her. "I was thinking about the future," she said, forcing herself to relax against his chest. "About what will happen to us. What would you like to happen?" Amber closed her eyes, feeling his masculine scent, the warmth of his skin, the rhythm of his breathing. For a crazy moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if the circumstances were different, if they had met in another way, if there wasn't the ghost of Michael between them, if she could simply surrender to that feeling that grew in her chest against her will. "I wish we were different people," she murmured. "Without a past, without baggage, without secrets." Daniel turned her to face him, and she saw something new in his eyes, a vulnerability he had never shown before. "Amber, there are things about me you don't know, things I've done, decisions I've made. If you knew everything, maybe you wouldn't want to stay by my side." For a moment, she thought he was going to confess everything right there. Part of her wished he would, because it would make everything simpler, clearer. But instead, he kissed her again, and this time the kiss was different, more desperate, as if it were the last time. They made love that night for the first time, and it was exactly as Amber had imagined it would be, intense, tempestuous, full of a passion that bordered on violence. Daniel possessed her as if she were the last woman on earth, and she surrendered with a hunger that frightened her. The sex between them wasn't just physical. It was laden with grief, guilt, desire, and a desperate need for connection that they both carried. Afterward, lying in the king-size bed while the city pulsed below, Daniel spoke about his childhood in a way he had never done before. He told her about his mother, Sophia Lawrence, a sweet and sensitive woman who couldn't bear the brutality of the world in which she lived, how she began to drink to forget the things she discovered about her husband's business, how she was committed several times to psychiatric clinics, how she finally disappeared on a winter night when Daniel was 16. "We never knew if she ran away or if she did something to herself," he confessed, his voice breaking. "My father forbade any investigation. He said it was better to accept that she had abandoned us and move on." "And did you move on?" asked Amber, tracing circles on his chest with her fingers. "I tried. I immersed myself in studies, in business, in anything that could distract me. But there's a part of me that never stopped looking for her." He sighed deeply. "Sometimes I think I've become someone she wouldn't recognize, someone she would be afraid to know." Amber felt a pang of pain in her chest. She knew well that feeling of becoming unrecognizable because of pain. She herself had transformed into a harder, more calculating version of herself after Michael's death. "We all do things that don't make our dead proud," she said, the words coming out truer than intended. Daniel looked at her with renewed interest. "You've also lost someone important." It wasn't a question, and Amber realized she had revealed too much. "Everyone loses," she said, trying to change the subject. "It's part of life." But Daniel wasn't fooled. "It's not just loss, it's guilt. I recognize it because I feel the same thing." He propped himself up on his elbow, studying her face in the dim light. "What happened, Amber?" For a moment, she wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to talk about Michael, about the clinic, about the real reason she was there. She wanted to stop the lie that was corroding her soul. But then she remembered the photo of the document, the evidence she had on her phone, the plan she had carefully crafted. "Not tonight," she finally said. "Some wounds are too deep to be opened in the darkness." Daniel nodded, understanding. He pulled her closer, and they slept embraced, two wounded hearts finding solace in each other, not knowing that what united them would also be what would destroy them. The following Monday, Amber arrived at the office with a defined plan. She would use the trust Daniel placed in her to get more evidence, more incriminating documents. She would organize everything systematically, and then seek investigative journalists who could give visibility to the case. But when she reached her desk, she found an envelope with no sender. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper with a typed message. "I know who you are. I know what you're doing. Meet me at Cafe Windsor at 3 p.m. if you want to know the truth about Michael Collins." Amber's blood froze. Someone had discovered her identity, her plans, everything. She spent the rest of the morning trying to work normally, but her mind was in complete turmoil. Who could know? How had they discovered? And more importantly, what did they want? At 3 in the afternoon, she left the foundation, saying she had a doctor's appointment. Cafe Windsor was in the historic downtown, a discreet place frequented by intellectuals and artists. Amber arrived a few minutes before the scheduled time and chose a table in the back from where she could observe the entire entrance. Punctually at 3 o'clock, an elegant woman entered the cafe. She was tall, blonde, dressed with discreet sophistication. Her eyes scanned the environment until they found Amber, and then she smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The woman approached and sat down without asking permission. "Amber Collins," she said, as if savoring the name. "Or should I say Amber Davis, the name you're using at the foundation." "Who are you?" asked Amber, trying to keep her voice firm despite the growing panic. "My name is Cassandra Lawrence," the woman responded, and Amber felt the world spin. "I'm a psychologist. I work as a consultant for various family companies, and I'm also Daniel's half-sister." "Pleasure to finally meet you in person." Amber tried to stand up, but Cassandra held her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't be hasty. We have a lot to talk about. After all, we're on the same side." "The same side?" repeated Amber, confused. "We both want to see Daniel Lawrence pay for his crimes," said Cassandra, releasing her wrist and leaning back in her chair. "The difference is that I know much worse crimes than you can imagine, and I have a much better plan than yours to make him suffer." From that moment, Amber knew she had entered a much more complex and dangerous game than she had ever imagined, and that perhaps she wasn't the only person with a thirst for revenge against the man she was falling in love with against her own will. Cassandra Lawrence had the same penetrating gaze as Daniel, but there was something colder in it, more calculating. She ordered an espresso and remained silent for a few moments, studying Amber as if she were an interesting specimen under a microscope. "You're wondering how I found out," she finally said, stirring the sugar with precise and elegant movements. "The truth is that I've known about you since the day of your interview. I had all candidates for the position investigated, and your past, well, let's say it caught my attention." Amber felt the blood pulsing in her temples. "What do you want?" "Straight to the point, I like that." Cassandra smiled, but the smile didn't warm her blue eyes. I want the same thing you do, to see my dear half-brother pay for everything he's done, but for much more personal reasons than yours. I don't understand. Of course you don't. You see Daniel as the crown prince, the golden son who had everything handed to him on a silver platter, but the reality is much more complex. Cassandra took a sip of her coffee and leaned back in her chair. My father, August Lawrence, had an affair with my mother when he was already married to Daniel's mother. I was born 6 months after him, but I was raised far from the family, hidden like a dirty secret. Amber began to understand the bitterness that showed through in Cassandra's voice. While Daniel grew up in mansions, attending the best schools, being prepared to inherit an empire, I lived with my mother in an apartment in Bucktown, receiving a generous allowance in exchange for our silence. Until I was 15, I didn't even know I had a brother. And when did you find out? My mother died in a car accident. Suspicious, I might add, but I could never prove anything. Cassandra's face hardened. August was forced to legally recognize me, but made it clear that I would never be a real part of the family. He gave me an education, paid for my psychology degree, even arranged jobs related to the family businesses. But always in the shadows, always as the bastard daughter who needed to be tolerated. Amber began to see Cassandra in a different light. Both had been hurt by the Lawrence family. Both carried deep scars. And Daniel knew about all this? Daniel always knew about my existence, but chose to ignore me. When we met at family events, he would greet me politely and move on, as if I were just another employee. Cassandra's voice trembled slightly. He had all the opportunities, all the love, all the attention. And when he started questioning some of his father's decisions, when he started developing something resembling a conscience, I realized I needed to act. Act how? Cassandra leaned forward, her eyes shining with a disturbing intensity. By showing the whole family, the whole society, that the perfect heir is nothing but a weak man, incapable of taking responsibility for his own actions. And you, my dear Amber, were the perfect tool for this. Amber's stomach contracted. What do you mean? You think it was a coincidence that Daniel drove by in his car that rainy day? You think it was luck that your application was accepted among hundreds of others? Cassandra laughed softly, a humorless sound. I orchestrated everything. I paid a private detective to investigate families who had been harmed by our family's business. When I found your case, I knew I had struck gold. Amber felt nausea rising in her throat. You made him drive to that street? I suggested he go see a specific property that day at that time. I knew you would be there because I had tapped your phone and knew your routine. Cassandra spoke with the naturalness of someone discussing the weather. The rest was luck and perfect timing. You're insane, murmured Amber, trying to stand up again. Insane? Cassandra held her wrist again, this time with more force, or just determined. I spent 30 years of my life being treated like garbage by this family. Now it's my turn to play their game. And what exactly is your plan? Simple. You'll continue doing exactly what you were doing, seducing Daniel, gaining his trust, collecting evidence, but when it's time to expose everything, you won't do it alone. I have much more incriminating material than you can imagine. Documents that prove not only his responsibility in your son's death, but also corruption schemes, money laundering, even evidence that he may have been involved in his own mother's disappearance. Amber's eyes widened. You think Daniel killed his mother? Not directly, but he knew she was investigating certain family activities. And on the night she disappeared, he was the last person to speak with her. Cassandra released Amber's wrist and leaned back again. I have recordings of those conversations. I have call records. I have a complete arsenal to destroy him. Then why do you need me? Because you're the perfect emotional weapon. Daniel is falling in love with you. Anyone with eyes can see that. And when he discovers who you really are, when he realizes he was used, manipulated, betrayed by the woman he loves. Cassandra smiled with cruel satisfaction. "It will be the definitive fall of the Golden Prince." Amber remained silent for several minutes, processing everything she had heard. She felt dirty, used, like a puppet in the hands of forces she didn't control. "And if I refuse to participate in your plan, then I'll expose you to Daniel immediately, tell him exactly who you are and why you're there. And then I'll publicly expose everything I have on the Lawrence family, including evidence that incriminates you as an accomplice in some financial schemes that you signed without knowing during these weeks working at the foundation." Cassandra checked the expensive watch on her wrist. "You have 1 week to decide. Next Monday, there will be a charity event for the foundation at the Plaza Hotel. It will be the perfect opportunity for our big revelation." Cassandra stood up, left enough money to pay for both coffees, and prepared to leave. But before, she leaned down to whisper in Amber's ear, "One last thing. Daniel isn't as innocent as you think. Ask him about Sophia Lawrence. Ask him what he really knows about his mother's disappearance. You might be surprised by the answers." And then she left, leaving Amber alone with her tumultuous thoughts and the weight of discovering that she was just a piece in a much larger and more sinister game than she had ever imagined. That night, Amber returned home in a state of shock. She sat on the old sofa, looking at Michael's photo on the small center table, trying to process everything she had discovered. Cassandra had manipulated her entire life over the past few months. The encounter with Daniel, her hiring, everything had been orchestrated by a woman thirsting for revenge against her own brother. But did that change anything? Daniel was still responsible for Michael's death. He had still signed the documents that authorized the demolition of the clinic. He had still chosen to prioritize profits over human lives. On the other hand, the idea of being used as an emotional weapon against him made her nauseous. She had begun this journey seeking justice for her son, but now she was involved in a personal revenge scheme of a woman who seemed as cruel as the family she claimed to hate. The next morning, Amber arrived at the office determined to confront Daniel about Cassandra's revelations. But when she entered his office, she found him on the phone, speaking in a low and tense voice. He motioned for her to sit and wait. "No, Dad, I already said I won't do that," he was saying on the phone. "No matter what you threaten, some lines I won't cross." Amber realized she was listening to an intimate conversation and felt uncomfortable, but Daniel made no gesture for her to leave. "I know what happened to Mom," Daniel continued, and Amber felt her blood freeze. "I know you had investigators follow her. I know you knew where she was that night, and I know you chose to do nothing to stop her." There was a long pause, and Amber could hear the muffled sound of shouting coming from the other end of the line. "No," said Daniel, his voice becoming firmer. "I won't be your puppet anymore. And if you try to blackmail me with this, I'll expose everything I know about you, about the company, about all the crimes I committed in your name when I was young and too stupid to know I had a choice." Daniel hung up the phone forcefully and remained silent for a few moments with his back to Amber, looking out the window. "Sorry you had to witness that," he finally said, turning to face her. "My family isn't exactly functional." "Daniel," Amber began, her voice coming out softer than intended, "I need to ask you something about your mother." He immediately stiffened. "What about her? Do you know what really happened on the night she disappeared?" Daniel studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand why she was asking that question. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I'm falling in love with you," she said, the words coming out before she could censor them. "And I need to know who you really are." The confession seemed to hit Daniel like a punch. He approached her slowly, his face expressing a mixture of hope and fear. "Amber, there are things about me, about my family, that are much darker than you can imagine. If I tell you the truth, you might decide you don't want to stay by my side anymore." "Let me decide that," she said, holding his hands between hers. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage. When he opened them again, There was a raw vulnerability in his gaze that made Amber's heart race. "My mother didn't disappear," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "She killed herself. I found the body." Amber felt the air leave her lungs. She had discovered the family's dirty business about the people who were harmed by our projects. She began to question my father, to threaten to expose everything publicly. He sent investigators to follow her, tried to intimidate her, used emotional blackmail using me and my siblings as bargaining chips. Daniel released Amber's hands and began to pace around the room, as if he couldn't stay still. On the night she died, she called me. She was crying, desperate. She said she couldn't live anymore with the weight of knowing about all the lives our family had destroyed. I said I would find a way to fix everything, that we could expose my father together, start a new life far away from there. But when I arrived at the apartment where she was hiding, it was already too late. She had taken an overdose of sleeping pills. She left a letter saying she loved me, but that she couldn't live anymore in a world where money was worth more than human life. Amber felt tears spring to her eyes. The pain in Daniel's voice was palpable, genuine. My father made everything disappear. Bribes, threats, falsified documents. Officially, she ran away from home and was never seen again. But I carried the weight of the truth alone all these years. Why did you continue working for him after that? Because I was a coward, admitted Daniel, stopping in front of her. Because it was easier to pretend nothing had happened than to face reality. And because a part of me believed I deserved to be punished for not being able to save her. Amber stood up and went to him, touching his face gently. "Daniel, there's more," he interrupted. "I know who you are, Amber. I know about Michael, about the clinic, about the real reason you're here." The world seemed to stop. Amber felt her legs weaken, her heart beating erratically. You know? Since the first day, since the interview." Daniel held her shoulders gently. "I never forgot your face from that rainy afternoon. Never forgot the way you looked at me when the car passed and splashed you. It was pure hatred, and I knew I deserved it. Then why did you hire me? Why did you let all this happen?" "Because I needed to be punished," he said, his voice breaking. "I needed to feel what it was like to be hated by someone who had real reasons to hate me. I needed you here, reminding me every day of the consequences of my actions." Amber looked at him with disbelief. "You're saying you used me to torture yourself psychologically?" "At the beginning, yes. But then I fell in love with you, really, completely, desperately. And then I realized I had committed the cruelest mistake of my life." Daniel held her face between his hands. "Because now I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, but I know you're here for revenge. I know that every kiss, every caress, every intimate moment between us is part of a plan to destroy me. Daniel, you don't need to lie. I deserve everything you'll do to me. I signed those documents when I was 22, young and stupid, but I signed them. I'm responsible for your son's death. I'm responsible for all the pain you've carried all these years." Amber was crying now, tears of confusion, anger, pain, and something she didn't want to name. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "Because on Monday, the Foundation's charity event will happen, and I know that's when you plan to expose everything. Cassandra already approached me, already told me about your plan together." Amber's blood froze. "Cassandra spoke with you?" "She's my half-sister, Amber, a disturbed woman who blames our family for all the tragedies in her life, and who is now using you to execute a revenge that will destroy not only me, but you as well." "What do you mean?" Daniel pulled a folder of documents from the desk drawer. "Cassandra falsified evidence. The documents she'll present on Monday aren't just about me. They include records that implicate you in money laundering schemes, as if you were an accomplice to everything from the beginning." Amber flipped through the papers with trembling hands. Her signature was on contracts she didn't remember signing, on reports she didn't remember writing. "She's planning to destroy us together," continued Daniel. She'll expose my crimes, but she'll also make you look like my accomplice. She'll ruin your life along with mine. Why are you telling me this? Why are you trying to protect me? Daniel pulled her into his arms, embracing her with a desperate intensity. Because I love you. Even knowing that you hate me, even knowing that you came for revenge, I love you more than I ever thought possible to love someone. Amber pulled back to look him in the eyes. Daniel, you don't need to say anything. I know you can't love me after everything I've done, but I want you to know that if I could go back in time, I would do everything differently. I would save Michael. I would save my mother. I would save you from all this pain. At that moment, all of Amber's certainties collapsed. The man she had hated for so long, whom she had planned to destroy, was there emotionally naked before her, offering his own heart as a sacrifice. And she realized with a terror that left her breathless that she was also falling in love with him. Against all logic, against all her thirst for revenge, against all her plans, she was hopelessly in love with the man responsible for her son's death. I don't know what to do, she whispered. Run, said Daniel, kissing her forehead tenderly. Take your real documents, leave Chicago, start a new life far away from me, from my family, from all this madness. You deserve to be happy, Amber. You deserve to find peace. And you? I'll confront Cassandra on Monday. I'll publicly expose all our family's crimes, including mine. I'll ensure my father goes to prison and that the victims receive some kind of compensation. And then I'll pay for my own crimes. Amber kissed him then, a desperate kiss, full of love and despair and farewell, because she knew that no matter what she chose to do, nothing would ever be the same again. The game had come to an end, but there were no winners. Only broken hearts and lives destroyed by the thirst for revenge that had consumed them all. When they separated, both knew it was goodbye, at least for now. Amber spent the entire weekend walking the streets of Chicago, trying to make the most difficult decision of her life. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Run. You deserve to be happy. But every time she thought about simply disappearing, the image of Michael appeared in her thoughts, reminding her that she had begun this journey for justice, not for love. On Sunday afternoon, she sat in Oakwood Cemetery before her son's simple grave. The flowers she had brought, white daisies, his favorites, were carefully arranged on the weathered tombstone. I don't know what to do anymore, my love, she whispered to the cold stone. I started all this for you so that your death wouldn't be in vain. But now everything is so confusing. The winter wind rustled the trees around, and for a moment Amber had the sensation that Michael was there with her, as in the first months after his death, when she felt his presence in every corner of the apartment. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her son's face, the sound of his laughter, the way he ran through the small house shouting with joy. Michael had been a happy child, full of life, who believed the world was a good place where people took care of each other. He would forgive you, a voice said behind her. Amber turned, startled, and saw an elderly woman with gray hair and gentle eyes, also holding flowers in her hands. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, said the woman, approaching. I just heard you talking and... Well, I lost my grandson 2 years ago. I also come here to talk to him. Amber nodded, understanding the shared pain. May I sit? Asked the woman, pointing to the nearby bench. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in her own memories and pain. You know what I've learned in these 2 years coming here, the woman finally said. That the dead don't want our vengeance. They want our love, our happiness, our ability to continue living in the best possible way. But what if someone needs to pay for what they did? Oh, my dear, the woman smiled sadly. Someone always needs to pay. But sometimes the price of revenge is our own soul. And then, in the end, we lose twice. The woman stood up, placed her flowers on a nearby grave, and before leaving said, Your boy wouldn't want to see you destroying your own chance to be happy. Think about that. Amber was alone again, but the stranger's words echoed in her heart. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life without the weight of revenge, a life where she could simply love and be loved. When she got home that night, she had made a decision. She wouldn't run away as Daniel had suggested, but she also wouldn't be Cassandra's emotional weapon. She would do things her own way. On Monday morning, Amber woke before sunrise. She spent hours getting ready, choosing each piece of clothing, each accessory, like a warrior preparing her armor for the final battle. She wore an elegant black dress she had bought with her first paycheck from the foundation, high-heeled shoes that made her look taller and more confident, and impeccable makeup that highlighted the determination in her eyes. The Lawrence Foundation's charity event would be held at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Amber took the 8 o'clock morning flight, feeling a mixture of nervousness and determination that made her heart beat rapidly. During the flight, she mentally reviewed her plan. She'd spent the night copying all the genuine documents she had collected about the Lawrence family's crimes, organizing them meticulously. But she had also prepared a surprise for Cassandra, a recording of the conversation they had at the cafe, where she confessed to having manipulated the entire situation. The hotel was dazzling, decorated with luxurious floral arrangements and golden lighting. The New York and Chicago elite were present, women in designer dresses and men in expensive tuxedos, all apparently interested in helping the less fortunate while drinking champagne that cost more than many people earned in a month. Amber arrived punctually at 7 in the evening when the event was beginning. She saw Daniel across the hall, talking with investors and journalists. He was impeccable in his black tuxedo, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes searched for her in the crowd. When their gazes met, it was as if an electric current crossed the room. Daniel excused himself from the people he was talking to and began walking toward her, but was intercepted by Cassandra. Daniel's half-sister was radiant, dressed in a red dress that highlighted her cold beauty. She held Daniel's arm and whispered something in his ear that made him pale. Then she looked directly at Amber and smiled, a smile that promised destruction. The dinner proceeded in a tense atmosphere. Amber was seated at a table near the stage, next to journalists and social photographers. Cassandra had clearly orchestrated that arrangement, ensuring there would be witnesses and cameras to capture everything that was to come. During the opening speech, August Lawrence, the family patriarch, spoke about social responsibility and the family's commitment to giving back to society everything they had received. Amber felt nauseous hearing those empty words coming from the mouth of the man who had ordered the destruction of the clinic where Michael died. When it was time for the foundation director's speeches, Cassandra rose elegantly and walked to the stage. Her voice was sweet and controlled when she began to speak about transparency and accountability. Today, I want to share with you some important discoveries about the functioning of our foundation, she said, a cold smile on her lips. Discoveries that show how some people try to infiltrate our organization with ulterior motives. Amber felt all eyes turn to her. The time had come. But before Cassandra could continue, Amber stood up from the table and walked toward the stage. The hall fell into total silence, all conversations instantly ceasing. "Excuse me," said Amber, her voice echoing clear and strong through the sound system. "Before Dr. Cassandra Lawrence continues with her presentation, I'd like to say a few words." Cassandra looked at her with surprise and anger, but couldn't stop her without causing an even bigger scene. Amber climbed onto the stage, feeling her legs trembling, but maintaining an erect posture. She looked at the audience of curious and hostile faces, found Daniel's eyes at the back of the hall, and took a deep breath. "My name is Amber Collins," she began, her voice gaining strength. "And I'm here tonight, not as an employee of the Lawrence Foundation, but as the mother of Michael Collins, a 4-year-old child who died because the clinic where he was being treated was abruptly closed to make way for a real estate project by this family." A murmur ran through the hall. Cameras began to flash. Journalists grabbed their recorders. For the past few months, I infiltrated this foundation with the aim of exposing the crimes committed by the Lawrence family. Crimes that cost lives, that destroyed communities, that prioritized profits over human beings. August Lawrence rose from the main table, his face red with anger. "Security! Remove this woman from here." But Amber continued speaking, her voice cutting through the growing tumult. "I have in my possession documents that prove corruption schemes, illegal evictions, and this family's direct responsibility in the deaths of dozens of people over the years." The security guards approached the stage, but were stopped by a group of journalists who wanted to hear the rest. "But I also discovered something else," continued Amber, looking directly at Cassandra. "I discovered that I was manipulated, used as a weapon in a personal war between siblings. I discovered that Cassandra Lawrence orchestrated my infiltration not for justice, but for personal revenge." Cassandra turned pale, for the first time losing her composure. Amber took her cell phone from her pocket and connected it to the hotel's sound system. "I would like everyone to hear this recording, made a week ago at Cafe Windsor." Cassandra's voice echoed through the hall, clear and incriminating. "You think it was a coincidence that Daniel drove by in his car that rainy day? You think it was luck that your application was accepted among hundreds of others? I orchestrated everything." The hall erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Cassandra tried to approach the microphone, but Amber continued. "Cassandra Lawrence not only manipulated my life, but she also falsified evidence to incriminate both me and her own brother. She doesn't want justice, she wants destruction." "These are lies," shouted Cassandra, trying to take the microphone. "Are they lies?" asked Amber, pulling a folder of documents from her purse. "Then how do you explain these fake contracts you prepared, where my signature was forged to implicate me in financial crimes? How do you explain having tapped my phone and orchestrated my meeting with Daniel?" The crowd was in complete tumult now. Journalists shouted questions, photographers fired flashes, guests whispered speculations. It was then that Daniel climbed onto the stage. "It's enough," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Amber is telling the truth about everything." He positioned himself beside her, and Amber felt a wave of gratitude and love that almost knocked her down. "My name is Daniel Lawrence," he continued, "and I am guilty of many of the crimes that were mentioned here tonight. I signed documents that authorized illegal evictions. I participated in schemes that harmed innocent families. And yes, I was responsible for the death of this woman's son." The silence that followed was sepulchral. "But I was also a victim of my half-sister's manipulation, who used both me and Amber in a sick game of personal revenge." Daniel turned to Cassandra, who was as pale as a ghost. "You orchestrated all of this, Cassandra. You used the pain of a mother who lost her son to get to me. That's unforgivable." You don't understand," stammered Cassandra. "I just wanted to destroy me," completed Daniel. "But in the process, you almost destroyed an innocent woman who had already suffered enough." August Lawrence approached the stage, surrounded by security guards and lawyers. "Daniel, you don't know what you're doing. Get down from there immediately." "No, Dad," Daniel responded, his voice echoing through the sound system. "For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing." He turned to the audience, which was in complete silence, waiting for his next words. "From today on, I resign from my position at the Lawrence Foundation and all family companies. I will fully cooperate with the authorities to investigate all crimes committed by our organization. And I will dedicate myself to ensuring that the victims receive the compensation they deserve." "You're insane," shouted August. "You'll destroy everything we've built." "I'll destroy everything you built on blood and suffering," corrected Daniel. "And I'll try to build something better in its place." He held Amber's hand, intertwining their fingers. "But I won't do it alone. If she'll allow me, I'll do it alongside the woman who taught me what true courage means." Amber looked at him through the tears she could no longer contain. "Daniel, I love you," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I love your strength, your determination, your ability to fight for what's right, even when it means sacrificing yourself. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve that love. But I came here to destroy you," she whispered, "and ended up saving me," he responded, kissing her forehead tenderly. What happened next was chaotic. August Lawrence was arrested right there in the hotel, along with other company executives. Cassandra tried to flee, but was detained by security guards and handed over to the police. Journalists bombarded Amber and Daniel with questions, but he protected her, making a path for them to leave the hotel. Outside in Central Park, they finally were alone. The night stretched before them, the city lights twinkling like stars. "What happens now?" asked Amber. "Now I'll probably go to prison," said Daniel with a sad smile. "I'll face the consequences of my actions. It will be a long, painful process. And me? You'll be free. Finally." He touched her face delicately. "You'll be able to mourn Michael without guilt. You'll be able to move forward. You'll be able to be happy. And if I want to be happy with you?" Daniel looked at her with surprise. "Amber, you can't want that after everything I did." "You were right that night in your apartment," she interrupted. "We all carry guilt. I also carried the guilt of Michael's death for years, wondering if I could have done something different, if I should have taken him to another hospital earlier, if... It wasn't your fault. And maybe it wasn't entirely yours either," she said, the words coming out with difficulty. "You were young, manipulated by your father, raised in a world where those decisions seemed normal. That doesn't excuse what happened, but people can change. They can redeem themselves. Are you saying you forgive me?" Amber remained silent for a long moment, listening to the sounds of the city and feeling the night breeze on her face. "I'm saying I want to try. I want to see if we can build something good together, something that honors the memory of Michael and your mother." Daniel pulled her into his arms, embracing her with a strength that spoke of desperation and hope in equal parts. "It won't be easy. The next years will be very difficult. I know. But I also know I don't want to face them alone." They kissed there in the park, under the starry New York sky, while the city continued its restless rhythm around them. It was a kiss that spoke of endings and beginnings, of forgiveness and redemption, of two wounded souls who had found in each other the possibility of healing. 6 months later, Amber sat in a courtroom in Chicago, holding Daniel's hand as he testified about the Lawrence family's crimes. He had kept his promise to fully cooperate with the authorities, providing evidence that led to the arrest of dozens of people involved in the corrupt schemes. The media had relentlessly pursued them during those months, creating conspiracy theories about their relationship, questioning the authenticity of their feelings. But they had faced everything together, supporting each other in the most difficult moments. Daniel was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but with the possibility of serving the sentence in a minimum security facility due to his cooperation. Amber visited him every day, bringing books, letters, and updates about the institute they had created together, an organization dedicated to helping families who were victims of medical negligence and illegal evictions. "Sometimes I still can't believe we're together," he said during one of the visits, holding her hands through the bars. "Neither can I," admitted Amber. "But maybe that's what true love is, the ability to find hope in the most unlikely places." "Michael would be proud of you," Daniel said softly. Amber smiled, and for the first time in years, she was able to talk about her son without feeling only pain. "I think he would like to know that his death wasn't in vain, that it helped other children have a better future." When Daniel was released 2 years later, they married in a simple ceremony with just a few close friends and colleagues from the institute. Amber wore a simple white dress, he a navy blue suit, There was no luxury or ostentation, just two people who had found in each other the possibility of starting over. They bought a small house in Lincoln Park with a garden where Amber planted white daisies in memory of Michael. Daniel began working full-time at the Institute, using his business experience to manage resources and ensure they reached where they were most needed. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were difficult days, arguments, moments when the weight of the past threatened to destroy what they had built. But there was also laughter, discoveries, small daily joys that reminded them that it was possible to be happy even after so much pain. One night, 5 years after the event at the Plaza Hotel, they sat in their home garden watching the stars. Amber was 4 months pregnant, and Daniel had his hand resting on her belly, feeling the first movements of the baby that would be a living tribute to the love they had built together. "Do you think we did it?" she asked. "Did we manage to build something good?" Daniel looked at the house they had transformed into a home, at the garden where Michael's daisies bloomed, at the woman who had begun as his punishment and become his salvation. "I think we're still building," he said, kissing her forehead, "and we always will be. But yes, I think we managed to create something good from the ashes." Amber smiled, feeling the baby move inside her, feeling the warmth of the man she loved beside her, looking at the stars that silently witnessed the transformation of two people who had found in love the strength to reinvent themselves. The past had not been erased. Michael still lived in her heart, just as Sophia Lawrence lived in Daniel's. But they had learned that it was possible to carry scars without letting them entirely define who they were. And there, under the infinite Chicago sky, with the daisies gently swaying in the night breeze, they knew they had found something that transcended revenge, guilt, or redemption. They had found true love, the kind that doesn't erase the past, but builds a future where it's possible to be whole again.